Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone.
So, merci d'être venu
Thank you very much for joining us today.
à cette série de conférences donc, sur
This
les
event
réseaux
is part
communautaires en Afrique.
of a series of conferences related to community networks in Africa.
Un certain nombre de conférences se sont passées sur
A
divers
number
thèmes.
of events have already taken place,
Aujourd'hui, nous vous
and
invitons
today
donc
we
à
are going to
un
focus on
séminaire
the
sur le
following.
thème de l'utilisation des
We are
réseaux
looking
communautaires
at the use of
pour
community
compléter
networks
le défi
in order
d'accès
to
en
bridge
Afrique
the
francophone.
access gap in Francophone Africa.
Nous espérons que vous passerez une
We
bonne
hope
session
that
avec
you're
nous.
going to enjoy this session.
Pour introduire la session, donc, je vais me présenter à vous.
I will say a few words about myself. I am your host today.
Je suis Jean-Baptiste, votre modérateur.
My name is Jean-Baptiste, and I'll be moderating today's
Je
event.
travaille pour Internet Society.
I work for ISOC, the Internet Society,
Je suis expert en technologie et
and my area
développement
of
de
expertise
l'Internet.
is in technology and development of Internet.
Je suis en charge de l'Afrique essentiellement.
I work mainly on the African
Je m'occupe
side of ISOC.
du développement des points
I
d'échange,
focus on the
du
development of
développement des
IXPs,
communautés techniques,
of
mais
technical
essentiellement
communities,
aussi, et bien sûr, de tout ce qui est
and
développement autour des
of
réseaux
course,
communautaires.
anything to do with the development of community networks.
Les objectifs de la session de ce
And what
jour,
are the aims of this session?
nous allons donc
Well,
discuter sur comment on peut
first of all,
utiliser
we're
les
going to
réseaux
consider how
communautaires
community networks can be used
pour réduire la
address
fracture numérique.
existing gaps in terms of internet access.
Et pour cela, nous allons,
And in
dans
order
un
to do
premier
so, we're
temps, vous
going to break
présenter
down the
ce
session,
que c'est que les
looking
réseaux
at the following
communautaires.
points. First of all, explaining what a
Nous
community
allons
network
aussi
exactly is.
tenter d'expliquer avec les
Then we're going
panélistes
to
comment
look
les réseaux communautaires
at
peuvent être
how
utilisés comme alternative pour améliorer
how
la.
community networks can be alternatives to improve access.
Par la suite, avec d'autres
Furthermore,
panélistes, nous allons aussi partager
going
des
to
expériences de réseaux
invite
communautaires réussis dans d'autres
partners to share experiences
sur le
that
continent.
have already taken place in other parts of the
Et
African
nous allons voir
continent,
comment les créer,
and
mais
we'll see how
passer en
community
revue les
networks can be
différents
created, but
problèmes
also looking
auxquels
at
on peut faire face,
challenges
comment ces
that can be
problèmes ont
overcome
pu
and
être
how they can be
résolus
overcome,
dans d'autres régions.
and how it has been done in other areas.
Avec nous aujourd'hui,
Today, we're welcoming the following panelists.
donc nos panélistes aujourd'hui, nous avons Jean-Louis
Today's
Fendji.
panelists are Jean-Louis Fendji.
Nous aurons l'occasion donc de le présenter bientôt. Il nous vient
We'll
du
hear a bit
Cameroun.
more about him.
L'enseignant-chercheur nous vient du
He's
Cameroun.
from Cameroon.
Nous avons aussi
Then
Chako
we will
Armant,
welcome Chako
qui
Armant
nous vient de la République
from
démocratique du
the
Congo.
Democratic Republic of Congo.
Et il nous partagera aussi son expérience
She
dans la
will share her
gestion des réseaux
experience
communautaires.
of community networks in this
En
country.
plus de Chako Armant, nous
And
avons aussi,
Chako will
toujours
also
de
be
la,
accompanied
du Congo démocratique, nous
by
avons
another
Patrick
colleague
Biamungu,
from the DRC, Patrick
qui a aussi
Biamungu.
une grosse expérience dans le
He is
développement et
very
la gestion
experienced in
de
the
solutions
development
d'accès
and
via les réseaux
management
communautaires.
of
Il va aussi
access
nous entretenir
issues
et
within
partager son
community
expérience.
networks, so he will bring his
Vers
contribution.
la fin de notre communication, nous allons faire appel à
And we will
Yanni Mahamat
also give the
Adou,
floor to
Tchad,
Dejani
et
Mamat
Ita
Adoum
Aboubakar
from Chad and
la
Ita
République
Aboubakar
de Guinée,
from
qui
Guinea.
vont nous partager des expériences
And
en
they will
cours
share their experience about the
lesquelles ils
important
travaillent
development
à développer
of
les
the
réseaux
community
communautaires dans les
networks that they
pays
are
respectifs.
currently developing in their respective countries.
Bien sûr, nous aurons une session
Of course,
de
there will also be
questions-réponses et
a
nous allons
Q&A
aussi, donc pour pouvoir échanger ensemble.
to facilitate exchanges.
Avant toute chose,
But before we
quelques règles
start, I would
de
like to
gestion
remind you
de
of
la
a
session
few
virtuelle.
housekeeping rules.
Donc, comme vous le savez, cette
As you
session
know, this
est
session is
enregistrée
being
et
recorded.
disponible
The recordings will be made
Facebook,
available
Twitter
for the
et
session.
d'autres outils de diffusion
You can
en live.
access these resources on Facebook, Twitter, and Periscope.
Et nous demandons
We've got a live stream.
pour
We would
une bonne
invite
session que vous puissiez,
speakers
lorsque la
to
parole vous sera
engage
donnée,
in a respectful and
de vous adresser
responsible
à
way.
l'auditoire avec respect et
So be mindful of these when
avec
addressing the audience or panel.
les bonnes choses qui s'y. Lorsque aussi vous allez demander à poser des questions ou à parler,
You will be invited to take the floor or ask questions, and we would ask you to be brief and get straight to the point so that we can invite as many people as possible to take the floor.
Intéressante.
And it will foster an interesting discussion if more people can take part. Could you also please make sure that when you contribute, you introduce yourself in your name and the country where you're from. It will give us a chance to better know you and know where you're coming from. We would also invite you to have a look at the Code of Conduct of the Internet Society, and you can see the link on the screen for that.
Donc, les hashtags pour suivre l'événement en ligne.
Hashtags to talk about the event online are on the screen. You can see hashtag community network, hashtag switch it on.
Et nous souhaitons aussi vous dire que grâce à nos partenaires, vous avez donc la traduction disponible en anglais. La session sera entièrement en français.
The session will be held completely in French, but you can follow in English using the interpreting channel.
Le canal d'interprétation en anglais.
Simply use the interpretation icon and select English channel.
You can also follow
the session with a live captioning in English that you can activate by clicking on captioning.
Vous avez aussi une zone pour discuter, donc une zone
There's also a space dedicated to exchanges and engagement. You can see the black box on the screen highlighting Q&A
pour poser les
questions and answers, and chat room, which will be dedicated to exchanges. So any questions you want to ask panelists, use the Q&A. Any exchange you want to have with other participants, please use the chat room function.
Donc, voilà, merci pour, en tout cas, avoir pris les règles de séance. Donc, nous allons aller
paying attention to the presentation of these rules.
Avec
Now, we're going to give the floor to Jean-Louis.
Fendji
is a lecturer and carries out research at Ngaoundéré University. He's here as a practitioner as well as an academic.
AfroLeadership.
And he's dedicated work to leadership. He's a member of the AfroLeadership group. He will talk about community networks, say a few words to explain what community networks are. And he will set a background to our discussion. And set a backdrop against which we can develop today's discussion. Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be able to take part in this session. As member of a committee for the program on community networks in Africa, it's a real pleasure to be able to take part to this session in French and to have a session dedicated to French-speaking countries in Africa in particular. I will organize my talk about what are community networks, their power, and we're going to look at challenges and ways to overcome when you're setting up a community network. Now, let's start with community networks. Well, this needs to be defined, and the term in itself contains two aspects: réseau, network, and this notion of community. So behind community, you've got a group of people in a geographic location. They share specific characteristics, but they also share the challenges that they have to overcome. And the network dimension is interesting because it's the idea of connections. Now, a community network is a group of people in a specific delimited geographic location who are connected, and they aim at collecting necessary information to address issues they face in their daily life. Now, to put it in a nutshell, you'll see this definition everywhere. A community network is a network defined and fought by and for the community so that it addresses the problematic specific to this community. So it's quite different from a network set by an operator, because operators don't really have a knowledge of the community itself. It's driven by profit, while a community network has got a very strong social dimension and aims at facilitating development. Now, let's talk about the power of community networks. There are several points need to be stressed here. Well, there's a limited percentage of access to internet in Africa. We're around 32% at the moment, according to the ITU. And when you compare it to the 60-odd% on a world level, it shows that access levels in Africa are well below world average. So there is a lot to be done, and the work is particularly challenging in rural areas that are difficult to access. Now, why are these areas not connected? Well, quite simply because communication network operators have no insurance that they'll get a return on investment. So these areas are not financially interesting, therefore they remained unconnected. So the cost of connecting these isolated communities is a problem. A study by the Alliance, the APC, it listed that amongst the top 20 countries in terms of access cost to internet compared to the GDP per inhabitant. So that when we look at the countries where these costs compared to the GDP is the highest, we've got a very significant proportion of African countries. What does it mean? Well, it means that the cost of connection remains very high. As a result, access to internet is a bit of a luxury that few can afford. So how can we address this cost issue for these isolated areas? Second point is that these areas currently represent a part where most activities are important but not valorized enough. Let's take the case of Cameroon. Well, agriculture is very important, but it's an activity you find in rural areas, isolated areas, and yet this is where agriculture can and should be developed. And connecting these isolated rural areas would be a catalyst for the development of agriculture. Another point arguing for the connection of these areas is that it's in line with the national plans for the development of digital connections. Most countries have a digital development plan. However, access to online services and, for instance, to e-government services, well, it's developed for cities, for someone who can easily access a desk or an office. And you can compare this to the situation in a rural area where you could have to go for over 10, 12 miles to reach a desk equipped with internet using tracks that are difficult to navigate. The third point is that there is a need to support these national digital plans. And the fourth point, which is not yet very visible, is the dissemination of data, local data. It's not really considered as very important. Yet, if you look at the importance of preserving culture, it's essential. We risk losing languages, for instance. Our maternal languages are still spoken in rural areas. We need to preserve them. There are not, however, threats against these cultural heritage, and there's a lack of content that can be used, for instance, through AI to improve the way we tackle these challenges. Therefore, we need to have policies that also include these isolated areas. And we need to share the local content so that digital resources can also support the protection of cultural heritage. Now, connecting these community networks, well, how do we go about it? If we compare community networks with more traditional network operators, the commercial networks, we see that the technologies used in community networks are quite cheap, affordable technical resources. They'll depend upon Wi-Fi, for instance, and Wi-Fi nowadays relies on point-to-point communication opportunities, and it can work over several dozens of miles. And access through mobile phones works. It's feasible. It facilitates access in these fairly isolated areas. So there is some degree of growth in access to internet. But if we've got a better Wi-Fi network, it will improve. Other devices are used. Other technologies using tele-white space. That is to say, using frequencies usually dedicated to television, but that aren't really used that much anymore, in particular in rural areas. So these unused frequencies can serve the development of internet, the development of internet access in rural isolated areas. Other technologies could be considered, such as the BTS stations, and they are cost efficient and would give people an opportunity to communicate through other means using local telephone networks, GSM. So we have a range of resources that could be used to promote the development of community networks. It's been done so far mostly in English-speaking parts of Africa, but it's still very much at an early development stage in French-speaking Africa. Now, I've talked about challenges, I've announced challenges. Well, there are a number of points that need to be tackled. First of all, there's a lack of information because lots of people are unaware of community networks. In Cameroon, up until recently, it was not really known. So workshops, seminars made community networks known as an option to bridge the gap. There needs to be better information, better dissemination of the information, better knowledge awareness of community networks. Now, you could be aware that community networks are a possibility. However, there may not be enough resources to develop these networks. So what we need next is support, technical support and financial support, because the vision needs these two pillars to be built. Most community networks benefited from some sort of support by key people who passed on the technical knowledge to the community to give them a chance to develop the networks. Now, in terms of financial support, well, funds are needed. That's unavoidable. However, the costs are minor compared to the development of a commercial network in the area. First essential challenge to overcome is access to equipment. Jean-Louis, could you please wrap up this point? I've only got 1 point left. I'm just about done. So I was going to talk about the access to equipment, which can be difficult, and the regulatory framework, which has not considered the creation of these networks in most African countries. But we have a project in the pipeline with ABC, the Association for Policy Communication, and I'm delighted that APC is supporting this initiative. We've got representatives of the Gabon chapter who are attending the session. So we have a strategy, and we can share the results of this regulatory framework for French-speaking African countries. And I'm going to conclude here. These were the points I wanted to share with you for this first intervention. Thank you, Jean-Baptiste.
Thank you very much, Jean-Louis. We know that you're a teacher, and that generally it's difficult to stop teachers once they've started talking. Thank you very much for this great introduction to the issues that we're discussing around community networks today. Thank you for sharing a point of view on technologies that are used in different places to develop these networks. And thank you very much for introducing the challenges when it comes to lack of information, issues, regulatory issues that need to be solved. So thanks again for this introduction. To continue our exchange, our discussion, I'm now going to call on the two experts, or two panelists in practical issues in the implementation of community networks. I'm going to give the floor to Patrick. See if today he can give us an overview of the situation of what they have done in Democratic Republic of Congo. And after Patrick, Chako will also be able to give us more information on the operational aspects of the management of these networks. Patrick, you've got the floor. If you can give us your presentation, please. Let's see. In case Patrick has any issues, maybe Chako, if you're with us, could you cover both of these aspects? To also cover Patrick's section. Hi, yes, I'm here. Hello. I'm Chako Armant. I'm head of project at La Différence, and I deal the project of our community network, PamojaNET, and I've done so since 2019. So just to tell you a little bit about PamojaNET, we created this in 2017 at the request of the legal representatives of an island in the southern East province of the RDC. And the region was chosen because it's a rather stable region. There are no wars or conflicts at the moment. And so we got this idea. We wanted to create this community network because the legal representatives of the island, Wami, so in Swahili means the king, He saw that there was a large exodus with youth who did not want to stay on the island after their studies, because most of these young people wanted to keep going with their studies in university in different larger cities and then did not come back to the island. And according to the legal representative, there wasn't sufficient motivation for them to do so. So we decided to create this community network with internet access. And we thought that this would be positive to motivate young people to stay and build up their community in their island. And that's why in 2017, PamojaNET was created. Pamoja means together. It's here we have the idea of bringing together the community to meet certain difficulties and solve them, related to marketing activities that are done on the ground, but maybe not be known by other people. For example, production of coffee. So we started collaborating with local communities. We created and installed antennas and poles. We created a management committee with inhabitants on the island, and together we also, with ISOC and APC's help, we created digital centers and kiosks where people can come and connect. And I think during our webinar today, we will try and answer some of your questions. But if I had to define a community network based on my experience with PamojaNET, I think I would say that we've got an internet network is linked to equipment to help you share information. And that's what we had in mind when we created and installed these poles and these antennas to share the connection on the island. But we also kept the community in mind, because we realized it wouldn't be useful to install this connection in a village because obviously the island has more villages, but it wouldn't be useful if people didn't know how to use it. So that's where our community approach led the way around this internet information. We had sessions and we helped women, and we tried to see how we could integrate them into this movement. We tried to develop and expand our community network. And I think in 2020, we received the Internet Society's support. And this allowed us to develop further the community network on the island. We've got two sections, north and south. And we were operating in the south, but in 2020, in the north, but in 2020, we expanded to the south. So this was also made possible thanks to the support of the DRC chapter of ISOC, and we collaborated with active members who are parts of that chapter. And Françoise Roukoukou, the current president, helped us, but also the former president, Eric, who really provided support in our project. So for me, a community networks is linked to IT equipment, but also engaging with local communities. We work in conjunction with the needs of local communities and services that will help the communities on the ground. We kept in mind our school, and we think in the years to come, if we have sufficient means and sufficient human resources, we would be able to focus on that idea and provide support to schools, because they need this support. We realized with research that there's a gap here. There's a gap of IT equipment, of updates on what's happening in the world. So we tried to discuss with the community, and we tried to find solutions to existing problems. So that's just to cover briefly how PamojaNET was created and how it works. Thank you very much, Chako, for this presentation and a bit of feedback on your experience. In the Kivu region, I see that Patrick has joined us. Would you like to add anything to what Chako's just said? Yes. Or maybe to share your experience of different challenges and what it brought to the community? Yes. So as Chako has already said, the idea for us in having community networks is not only about a simple connectivity. We don't just find an X or Y community that is isolated and needs a connection. That's just one aspect. But the major part is the idea of developing new digital services that are useful and have their importance for the community. So we're following this movement, and we really want to develop these digital services. As my colleague Chako said, and she highlighted the fact that we want to develop our model, and it's something that we are actively doing. We finished, almost finished, the north and southern part of the island, and so now we're trying to apply the same model in different areas. In another area of Democratic Republic of Congo, it's a very enriching experience, and it has taught us a lot. So the lessons that we have drawn, or that people have drawn from this experience in the north, is that we received feedback around these different services that we implemented. We used a security service, and thanks to various services, for example, children were able to find their families when they were lost. We're also aware of the fact that during the implementation of these services, there's also something of a learning process along the way. We don't necessarily have the right technicians on the site. The infrastructures are not necessarily in place, but we work with the community and we collaborate, and the community learns along the way. They learn how to access internet, how to use the various tools such as smartphones or tablets. And that is something that is very gratifying for us, realizing that it works and having that kind of feedback. Thank you very much, Patrick, for your testimony and sharing all your experiences when it comes to implementing, creating these community networks and how that has worked within your community. And for bridging what Chako said. We know that a few years ago you were supported by the Internet Society, and this allowed you to develop a video access, and you were able to film what you were doing. And this was something we used to try and boost Francophone community networks in Africa. We're just going to show this video, and once we get to the Q&A section, I think most of the panelists will be able to answer questions that people may have. If you allow me, we will show you the video.
La gestion de l'Internet dans les territoires d'Idjui où nous intervenons est intimement liée à l'organisation. Et c'est à l'organisation communautaire, en fait. Il y a des comités de gestion qui se créent à chaque fois que nous créons des kiosques ou nous implantons des kiosques dans un village. Et cela se fait même sur demande de la population.
Technically or financially to solve the problem, then that's where PamojaNET starts to help.
Internet is very beneficial because it enables us to have forums, and all the members of a community, of a village, joined the discussion. And internet is an issue that interests many people. We have debates as communities within the village, and we discuss anything to do with internet. So questions come from the population, and the solutions come from the population too. And the decisions, the solutions to problems are the object of a common work. And then we ask for specific support to help us address the issues we face. And it really relies on population capacity. One key issue was the safety of the kiosk. But we ensure the security of the kiosks, and we meet regularly, a couple of times, or quite frequently, to discuss the need for training. And it's also an opportunity to discuss everything and anything. And the community helped set up the kiosk, and one girl volunteered to work with the kiosk, at the kiosk at our level. Keeping the place secure was important, and it meant that there might be one issue that would cause issues, but if there's a local issue, we've got a local solution. The development of internet access was very important for women as well. And we've found that women are very good at appropriating internet tools. They learn quickly how to use internet. So they play a key role in the community. If we hadn't seen the importance of this woman, this person, then we'd miss out. And this young woman was very proactive, very interested. She was very keen, and she said, well, I am going to volunteer. I am going to serve my community. I'm going to learn about internet, and I learned to manage this kiosk. She's learned to use the technology that was installed and to maintain it. When it comes to organize meetings with boys, well, the girls have a voice. I participate every time. And when it comes to decision making, girls' views are also taken into account, and girls have an opportunity to speak. They're taken into account. We have already got a young woman who's in charge of handling some of the services, and this is a sustainable model. It's sustainable in that if there are issues, for instance, with keeping the place secure, well, we have taken charge of it. We have come up with solutions, organized guarding system to keep the equipment safe. And during the day, we have shifts to make sure that nobody has stolen anything or damaged any of the key equipment installed in the kiosk. So we've taken ownership of these equipments, these infrastructures.
Thank you very much. Thank you for really helping with the development of the community, and I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I remember you talking about this and contributing to the development of the community. To continue with our panel today, we're going to move in a different direction. We've had an explanation of what community networks are, and We've had community networks with PamojaNET and how community networks work. But now I'm going to invite two more panelists who are going to tell us a little bit more about how things are done to implement community networks in different countries. First of all, I'm going to give the floor to Tijani, who's going to share their experience in Chad. So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes, and if you can tell us a little bit more about why you wanted to create a community network, where you're at with the development of said community networks, and that this will give us a better overview of the situation there, please. After Tijani, Keita will be able to tell us about the Guinea experience. Tijani, you've got the floor first. Thank you very much. So I was already introduced by JB. I'm Tijani Mahabat Adoum. I represent I'm the president actually of the Chad chapter of the Internet Society. And I'm very present in the internet ecosystem. We got an opportunity to delve deeper into the country's issues, and we realized that there are several communities in Chad who were not connected at all. And here it wasn't only a question of the internet. They were disconnected from the rest of the world and the entire digital world. There was no cell reception, telephone connections, no internet connection, just radio diffusions and television. So these communities were on their own. They didn't receive any information on what was going on around them. They weren't able to share what they were experiencing. And that's why we got this idea of creating a community networks in these different areas of the country. So just to give you a little bit of background information, here it wasn't just about 1, 2, or 3 the different regions. It was a very large portion of the country that didn't have any form of network. So we created a project and drafted a feasibility project to see how we could meet the needs of this community when it comes to networks, and see what kind of networks we could implement in the different regions. The feasibility study showed us that we could maybe implement an internet network, because this region was by different solutions. So we're working on implementing these. And I think since the network might be launched in January, and this will be managed by the community that benefits from it. And we're really working on the ground to collaborate with the community, because local councils have taken charge of different responsibilities related to the project. We've also got the Community Association of Gen that has decided to help us and to manage the installation and the network once it is implemented. We also have an action plan that covers training, especially for managers who will need to manage this project after it has been launched. So I don't think that will be the end of it. Here we find more needs in different areas of Chad. And I'll just remind you that in 2022, we registered 52 deaths of people who were just lost in the desert. They didn't have any cover that allowed them to call for help. They couldn't use local telephone networks or GPS networks to figure out where they were. And we received some testimonies of people who used their phones to record videos because they knew that in the coming hours they wouldn't be with us anymore. And we were really moved by these videos, and we thought that we really needed to find a solution to this situation and find concrete solutions in these regions. So we're still running this feasibility study, and it's thanks to the Internet Society that we are able to run these studies. I think it's now time to publish a report that will be available to the entire community, and it will cover all the various studies and works that we are trying to implement. I'm open to any questions you may have, and maybe I can bring some concrete answers to questions that you may have and that I may be asked today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tijani Mamat. Thank you for sharing your experience, the experience of Chad, and the initiatives you have launched. What you are developing to address issues of access in some parts of Chad is very relevant. If Keita is here and ready to talk about Guinea, we'll pass the floor to him, and then we will open the discussion and invite questions. Keita, are you with us? I think Keita is having a few issues in joining us today, but we've already had very interesting contributions from the member of the panel on today's topic from various perspectives. And as a professor, Joseph Kiziabo, that I've had the privilege of hearing, we aren't developing, we're developing ourselves. And this is really the issue. How can we work together at developing access to internet by ourselves through our communities? And I would like to use this as a plea and an invitation to participants. Please share your experiences, your views, and tell us how you reckon we can develop for ourselves. So I'm going to take the questions in the order in which they've been raised. And I will invite panel members to answer these questions. The first question from Kosia Messino. They would like to know whether regulations are not the key hurdle to overcome for community networks. And I might send the question to Jean-Louis. Jean-Louis, could you give us an answer to this question? Are regulations the key issue? And maybe Chako could also add to the discussion. Well, thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. It's true that the regulatory framework can be a hurdle to overcome. However, when you look at what's been done elsewhere, community networks appeared before the government came up with regulations for this particular point. And in fact, what the community network is doing is very much socially driven. It's facilitating access to information for development purposes. So I don't think regulatory frameworks would hold this back. Now, it's also important to have a regulatory framework to scaffold and support the development, but it could be a hindrance. For instance, we've got 2 community networks in place already, but there's no real regulatory framework in place. It can be a limit, but initially it's not an obstacle to setting up community networks. That's what I would say on the matter. Thank you very much, Jean-Louis. Chako, any insight? Do you agree with what Jean-Louis has just said? Does it tally up with your own experience? Are regulatory frameworks a hindrance where you are? Well, thank you very much for this question. I think that my colleague may have a few things to say, but when we look at regulations in the DRC, it's a challenge. And we're currently working at securing a license in order to flourish more. The issue that we encountered appeared in a number of strategic points of the DRC, but the idea through the license is to get a sort of blanket cover which enables us to go further. Now, it's particularly complex an issue in the DRC because it's handled at the presidency level, and we really need a lot of diplomatic efforts to secure that. And APC has been supporting us to help us as community networks to reach the documents, the decision makers. ISOC has also provided us the support in the DRC, and in that they've helped in facilitating meetings with the powers that be to make them understand the need for community networks to provide structures where there's no money, no infrastructures, nothing really. And that's how we're approaching the challenges of regulatory frameworks. But I would like to invite my colleague to say a few words. Thank you, Chako. Before we pass the floor to Patrick, I would like to ask Patrick to add a few words. How you address the issue of that village that had no electricity connection, because it adds another layer of difficulty. So could you cover access to electricity as well as regulatory framework hindrances? Patrick? Well, allow me to start by this question of access to electricity. Yes, you're very right in raising this issue because it is a key challenge. One of the key challenges we've encountered, it's basic infrastructures. In fact, it's not an issue in most countries to have access to electricity. So we faced a lack of infrastructures. In our cases, all the networks that we have been developing use solar power perched quite high up, like panels set up quite high up with backup batteries to store the electricity generated. And it really enables us to power the equipment. So these are practical solutions that have been implemented. And if you're aiming at connecting isolated areas where there's no electricity network in place, there's no real alternative. You have to have local solar panels generating the electricity you need. I mean, other techniques could be used, but solar panels coupled with storage batteries can be found on the market. They're fairly affordable, so they provide a solution. Now, to come back to the question of a regulatory framework, well, it's always a real challenge. A challenge which slows the expansion of community networks. In our particular case, we have faced such problems. We have a law in place. It dates back to the 1970s, 80s, and of course, back in those days, there were no communities, no possibilities for communities to tackle connectivity issues. So we are facing the issue of an outdated legal framework. There's interference from one of the speakers who's talking over the current speaker. The interpreters can't hear. So we need to try and reach these isolated communities. We need to create communities and adequate legal frameworks to facilitate the development of community networks. What's very important is to consider the cost of securing the license my colleague mentioned, because regulators treat community networks in the same way as they would treat a commercial operator, meaning that securing a license is costly. So negotiations need to be implemented and used to bring down the cost. And community networks don't necessarily have the means to negotiate this type of licenses. So we need support for that. Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much, Jean-Louis and Chako. I think that there's a real need for global advocacy, for a better understanding of community networks and for adequate regulatory frameworks. And it could be a topic on which we could work jointly to see the type of lobbying that worked elsewhere and what didn't work. But there's a clear need for advocacy in order to facilitate the connection, the access for communities that still haven't got access to internet. Now, to move forward, I would give the floor to Jean-Louis. Ngaoundere is asking a simple definition for a community network. What's the difference between a community network and the internet networks that we know? So Jean-Louis, in your capacity as lecturer, could you help us answer this question? In a few simple words, what is a community network and how does it differ from standard known operators? Thank you very much, Jean-Baptiste. It is indeed a very topical question, a very relevant question. And I would like to also maybe chip in on the last question. We are working with APC on a paper on regulations and a regulatory framework for French-speaking African countries. And we're going to share the results of this study carried out in collaboration with Internet Society, as it could be a sound basis to build upon which to build advocacy. Now, defining a community network in simple words, well, I think I was maybe a bit too quick in my explanation. I don't know if the person missed my explanation, but I'm going to focus on the two components, the community aspect and the network aspect. The community refers to the geographic location and the group of people who have shared common interests, but also face the same challenges. And the network dimension is this idea of interconnection, establishing links between these people. These people have got equipment, IT equipment, and we want to connect them so that they can communicate using this IT infrastructures, but they need to have access to internet for their development. The difference between this type of community network and standard internet networks is that when we talk about internet networks or internet in general, the key difference really is down to the need for a connection. What is particular to community networks, and something that people don't know, is that the community network can be in place but not be connected to internet. So there could be a local network with interesting content relevant to this population, but they miss the connection to internet, and there's a cost there. So we have community networks which have services, content, resources relevant to local communities, but they might not yet be connected to internet. That's the difference with being connected to internet, which enables you to share or access wider content, a wider range of content. So we've got a community network with relevant content and resources for local communities. May I say a few words? So thank you, Jean-Louis, for your view. I think we've got two questions. And two questions relate to the process in place to benefit from support. There are two approaches. ISACA belongs to a chapter. There are grants that you can apply for via your ISOC chapter to start running the feasibility study or to start setting up the networks. And to answer Kosi's question, you could present a project for connection and present this project to the Internet Society, who will study the feasibility of your project, and we can see how we can accompany you. So you can work within the chapter or by approaching the Internet Society. But there are other sources of funding, and we could help you target relevant available funding if you want to go down this route. We have another one or two questions, Martha Kebre and Sylvie Signan, regarding the economic model. Our friends of DRC have shared their experience, and the Internet Society has published a document on how to prepare for the launch of a community network. It is available on the website, and within this document, you will see a sort of matrix that enables you to establish how you can build up a financially viable model. So I will refer you to this document because I think that this document will address your questions. Now, I would like to come back to Patrick. Patrick, could you talk about the economic model of PamojaNET? Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Patrick, could you speak a little bit louder? You sound as if you were quite far from your microphone. Can you hear us? Can you hear me? Yes, thank you. So what I was saying is, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to share our experience and in particular our economic model. But to sum it up, we work in very deprived, poor areas. There's not enough wealth, not enough income in these communities. So, the income is below $1 per day for the local inhabitants. There are very limited incomes, revenues. Yet within these communities, there are always domains that are driving the local economy. For instance, on the island, there's an area. Patrick, sorry to interrupt. We can't hear you very well. There's maybe an issue with the connection. We can hear him. Thank you. I was saying that in one of the areas of the island where there's about 300,000 inhabitants, the key production is coffee. But as it's an island, there are also fishermen communities. They're fishing, but it's not an industrial type of fishery. It's more basic. In Age, you also find the production of fruits such as pineapples, oranges, and the community gets organized around the potential of these local industries. They've created cooperatives and they contribute globally to the economy of the island. So our economic model is based on supporting these industries within the community. There are cooperatives, there are small hotels, there are organizations, NGOs that are working locally for healthcare, education, water, sanitation, etc. So we rely on local reality to establish this financial model. So when we set up Wi-Fi in this area, we mapped the potential, the economic potential in this area. Our model is very much based on offering internet connection to the various companies which support the development in the community. So it could be giving internet access to an agricultural cooperative that work during the day. It could also be NGOs based locally, but it can also be offering internet access to hotels which welcome tourists who might be interested in visiting the island. These organizations use the internet connection we put at their disposal. They use the bandwidth during the day. It enables them to operate, to send emails, to join calls, or to establish connections with potential buyers for the coffee producers or potential investors. So they use the internet connection from morning until late in the afternoon, let's say around 5 p.m. And from roughly 4 p.m., the connection is free for the rest of the community. So in the evening, anyone who wishes to connect to internet via their mobile phone or any other device can do so in the village. So they can come to the kiosk and use internet for free. So for us, it's a win-win situation. Companies or local initiatives contribute financially to the maintenance of a network, but the community benefits from the bandwidth out of usual working hours, and that's how it works. So companies fund access for the community. Thank you very much, Patrick, for your intervention.
We've got a couple questions that maybe I might ask. I might give this one to the Chad. What is the socio-cultural impact? Do you think you're answering a specific issue with your community network project? And do you think that all of this can contribute to the digitalization of the agricultural sector? So, Tijani, maybe if you've got something to contribute related to that question, and then maybe Jean-Louis could add something. So yeah, in terms of the socio-cultural impacts of community networks. Thank you very much, JB. So I just wanted to mention something on the economic model, because we've also got interesting data. Yes, of course, go ahead. Yes, so during the interviews that we had with the communities that benefited from all of this, we have similar results to Congo. We agreed to give access to the population using contributions or very reduced costs, especially for people who already had devices that allow them to access the internet. And for those who do not have devices, we plan to give access to these devices with public access. There are some villagers who may need to communicate with their parents or other people in the city, and because there is no telephone coverage or other means to communicate with them, then we are going to allow them to use the services like WhatsApp and such to be able to call the correspondent directly. And they will contribute very, very reduced fees, maybe 10 minutes for 50 francs. So these contributions will allow us to cover the fees for the management of the project. These different costs need to cover capacity, energy. We use solar energy also. And it allows us to remunerate people who manage the kiosks. So these aren't wages, but it's something to cover maybe their travel or things like that. And so that's the model that we're planning on using in our project. But now, just to touch upon the question you did ask me, the project, I think, will contribute to a development culturally and socially of the country. There's a sub-council that it is not necessarily known in the rest of the country, and it's something that's quite inaccessible, and you cannot get there by road. You have to take a massive detour because there are no roads. So I think that the internet will allow them to also be able to access cultural content from other societies. And if they are trained properly, they could also share their local content and all their cultural content. For example, filming things that happen in their community and upload it. Apps like TikTok and other apps really have their role to play in sharing local cultural content. When it comes to contribution to digitalization of agriculture, I think it will contribute massively. I think 6 out of 12 months are rain, and therefore agriculture is very developed in this area. So now we've got an issue with export. We need to be able to communicate around the product that is cultivated on site. I think the project will allow them to communicate and to see on the market where there's a need. They can create contacts, they can exchange, and potentially send their crops, the harvest, elsewhere. And I think this will really contribute to the different diversification of the economy and use agricultural produce. because it's a really large section of the country's economy. So I think we're soon going to see the benefits of this project. Thank you very much, Tijani. It's really positive to see all these different developments with your project. I think we've got 9 minutes left. One question that I'll put to all of our panelists from Nico Chichu Bakajaka. He's asking, what about community networks that are said to be community networks, but sell the network to physical people? So I think, Jean-Louis, maybe you could answer this one first. And then the other question I would like to ask is, how do you identify positive sites for community networks? How can you best identify an appropriate site for community networks? Jean-Louis, if you can answer in 1 or 2 minutes the question I asked you. Yes, thank you, Jean-Baptiste. I'd like to answer the question from the member of our audience. To answer the question, what we need to understand is it's not because it's a community network that the connectivity must be entirely free. There is a cost, be it cost of access to the internet. There's the cost of all the maintenance operations. We've had support, financial support, to establish this project, but there's the management, the maintenance of all of this. So in Chad and DRC, economic models differ. Someone has to pay somewhere. So somewhere along the chains, there will be costs. If no one pays, then community members will have to participate to some of the costs. But this is still different from a traditional network. Thank you very much, Jean-Louis. Patrick, did you have something to add? Yeah, maybe 1 minute. I didn't want to add something. I wanted to answer the second question. How do you identify appropriate sites for community networks? I think with our experience, it's not the community network that identifies a site. I think it's the need on one particular site that is felt throughout the entire community and takes us to one solution and leads to the implementation of a community network. We saw with different events that we've had around the world, in Africa, we've seen different community networks in Latin America that appeared in mountain regions. But the question of configuration here, of the choice of the site or the location where this community network is created, comes later on. The initial question is that of the need on a local scale of the community. If the community thinks we want to solve this problem and the best way to solve this problem is to start a community network, then that is what can be done. And it's in that context that we'll then decide to implement a community network in X or Y city. There's also the question of geographical configuration. In some areas, for example, if there are mountain ranges, this differs from a valley. So that question pertains more to technical aspects, but it's something that we can solve if the community is ready and really wants to implement a community network. Thank you very much, Patrick. Chako, you've got the floor. You can take 1 minute to maybe conclude. And as I was saying earlier, we don't develop, we develop ourselves. So how can we help French-speaking country to integrate this movement of community networks? You've got 1 minute, and then we'll go back to the final panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jean-Baptiste. I just wanted to touch upon the question of choice of community networks. As Patrick said, I think we have to create hypotheses and see in which areas do we feel the need for a community network, but we don't know what reality is. So we lead research, and we've got simple questions, and we share this with the community. We use phones, apps like Global Connect. And using this information, we realize that in a certain place, there might be a real need. So that's how we work with the community, as Patrick said, and then we bear in mind the structural questions. So to conclude, I think for me, for countries like DRC, Cameroon, Chad, we've already got some experience. And I've always said I want to share and help others. So having the ISOC support, APC support, and other people who want to support the development of the internet in Africa, we really want to receive the support, and we want to give the same support to other countries in their journey. That's what development is. Thank you very much, Chako. We've got 1 minute. Jean-Louis, 1 minute. Chako spoke for herself, for Patrick, for DRC. Jean-Louis, you've got 1 minute, and then I'll conclude. Thank you, Jean-Baptiste. All I can say is that community networks are a reliable alternative to cover rural areas. It allows for development, real development in this context, relies on the various activities on the ground in these rural areas. So we need to have more of these sessions to exchange and discuss around the different challenges and solutions that we can develop. Thank you, Jean-Louis. I think that we're going to conclude our session on that note. Apologies for those whose questions I did not ask. The recording will be available online. It was a pleasure for me to moderate this session and to have our panelists here with us today. And I hope that you understood a little more around this issue and the questions around community networks, and that you'll be able to develop projects in your own communities, and that together we can contribute on the access to internet and availability of access in various communities. I would also like to thank all our panelists, to thank the technical team that helps us for the success of this event. Thank you to the Internet Society, APC, and all of their partners. Thank you to the program committee from the Community Network who allowed us to organize this session. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you next time for another discussion. Have a lovely day and see you soon. Bye. Thank you. Goodbye. Bye.
Recording stopped.